Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about framing expectations for the client's experience going into medicine sessions. So this is really setting realistic expectations about what psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is like, what the outcomes are, and what the experience is like, and probably debunking some myths as you do it. So this should be part of the preparation phase with the client. I have a previous video detailing the things that you're responsible for making sure happen in the preparation phase. So go back and watch that first if you haven't seen it. So framing expectations. Clients often come in with an impression from the media that psychedelic psychotherapy will perhaps cure them when nothing else has, or will completely eradicate their symptoms. And they often have the impression that that may happen between 1 to 3 sessions. And it's important to talk about that really carefully and make sure that people are realistic about expectations. Part of that comes from a little bit of the media overplaying or over-interviewing people who have had really profound healing experiences in, say, 1 session. So that gets disproportionately highlighted. And then another big factor is that a lot of the more reputable voices out there speaking to the media are people in research settings who are doing the clinical trials, often where 3 sessions is the norm because of the way that those studies are set up. So there are some expectations there. And what I think it's important to let clients know is that the odds are that the client sitting across from you in this intake that you're doing wouldn't meet the criteria for a clinical trial. They probably have more comorbidities or have more diagnostic complexity than the narrow sort of admissions criteria to get into a clinical trial. And so it's very often that I'm telling the person across from me, people with your combination of symptoms, for example, actually haven't been studied. So we don't know what the average amount of sessions is. And at the end of the day, it's not super important to know how many sessions you may need and so on, because it's really impossible to predict. But it is important to let people know that in real world outpatient clinical practice, we see a wide variety. And there are certainly people who do amazingly well with 3 sessions, and then there are people who need more. And so people need to know that that's something that they may fall anywhere on a spectrum with, and that if they need more than 3, that will be something that will be discussed with their therapist, hopefully anticipated a bit ahead of time in the preparation phase, and that will be an evolving conversation as you go. It's really important that you don't preemptively stop at 3 if the client needs more than 3, because it's possible that you'll just open up things and begin a process that you then prevent from really fully coming into completion, which can be psychologically harmful. And certainly not quality of care. So I have a conversation right up front about the number of sessions being flexible and something that's discussed as we go. Obviously, there are financial constraints for a lot of people, and that has to be factored into the conversation. But make sure you don't give them an artificial impression that, yes, this is a 3-session protocol and everybody does 3 sessions or something like that. Another myth that's out there is the idea that the experience is overwhelmingly positive or mystical or spiritual. And what I would say is that yes, sometimes, and also sometimes not. So it's important that the client doesn't think that they need to have a spiritual or mystical experience to experience any kind of benefits. A huge percentage of people that we see in our practice would not describe a lot of their sessions as spiritual in any sense, and yet they may be profoundly insight providing. So they may really feel like they're valuable from a therapeutic point of view. And so the goals are really about working with the presenting symptoms that the person is coming in with and getting some sort of relief from those symptoms. It is not necessary to have a profound spiritual experience for that to happen. And then it may happen, but we are not going to be attached to that as an outcome. So after you've debunked some of those myths, it's important to talk to them a little bit about what the actual experience on the medicine feels like. And that means talking about the types of things that they may experience as coming up for them. So I mentioned mystical or spiritual experiences. People often ask about that, and if they don't, I may bring it up. One thing that I like to make sure my trainees know is that though there's a percentage of people that want those experiences, there's actually also a percentage, maybe smaller, that overtly does not want that. Going into the experience, that's not what they're looking for, and that actually is a little bit, feels a little aversive to them or uncomfortable. They're really much more interested in maybe learning to navigate their own mind or their own experiences or work through past traumas. They don't necessarily want to categorize it as spiritual. So just be aware of that, and be careful that you don't put that language onto a client when that's not that's not coming from them. Another piece that clients have curiosity about is like having a bad trip or a negative experience. So it's important to have a conversation around the fact that some of the content that they experience may be dysphoric, frightening, sad, maybe grief. There may be things coming up, content around traumas. So it's not necessarily all a positive experience. There are challenging emotional aspects to doing a psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy session. I make a point to talk to people about differentiating that from sort of bad trip idea, which is being sort of overwhelmingly terrified and disoriented and not able to get out of that state. And I make sure to tell people that that's not an experience that we ever see in the clinical setting, which is true. But that doesn't mean that the experience is going to be universally positive. They may be dealing with challenging emotions around some of the content that comes up. And so have a thorough conversation with people around that and make sure that's something that they are prepared for and have a willingness to possibly encounter. And then do speak to them about the fact that that is often some of the more profound, effective components of a session. For example, if someone has a trauma or a lot of buried grief or something like that comes up in a session and is able to be worked through, in that moment it may feel quite distressing, but they often afterwards will feel a lot of relief or feel like it was really helpful. And so put that concept out and allow people to ask questions about that, and be sure that they have a nuanced understanding of what that is and the difference between that and just having a bad trip experience. I also tell people that there's this idea of the peak mystical experience and then the sort of negative or scary. A lot of time in this session is just spent in the in-between zones where nothing much dramatic is happening. That's also possible. In fact, you may have several sessions like that where you may just be noticing the strangeness of the experience and having curiosity or having sort of arbitrary things come through your consciousness. So it's not necessarily always an intense one or the other. And so I talk a little bit about that. And then there is definitely a piece of talking about the specific bodily effects of the different medicines. And we've covered that with regard to ketamine in another video. But what I'm mostly focusing on here is framing expectations around the experience. So those are the biggest pieces around maybe debunking some myths the client has and making sure that they're not coming in with an inaccurate impression. So we've talked about the fact that it may take more than 3 sessions, the fact that it may or may not feel like a spiritual experience, if that's something they're coming in wanting to talk about. The fact that given their different comorbidities and so on, the outcome of how long it will take for them to work through what they're struggling with is not predictable and has to be part of an ongoing conversation. Conversation around sort of negative or dysphoric emotions and how that may be valuable therapeutic content, what that might look like and feel like, and so that they know that that's a possibility. And then important to note with people that the sessions can vary a lot. So they may have one type of experience in one session and have a completely different experience the very next session. So there's a lot of unpredictability when you are working with psychedelic altered states that we just have to create a certain allowance for and make sure that the client has a frame of reference that includes the possibilities of all of these things. So the last thing I would put out for today is that talk to the client about framing an intention. some education around how set and setting is relevant and what an intention is as part of set or mindset. If you haven't seen my video on set and setting, do watch that one as well for more information on that piece. So I usually recommend to most clients coming in who have never had a psychedelic experience that for their first one, they hold an intention merely of curiosity, a certain openness, and just like a willingness to see what the state is like. I don't recommend for the very first one that they have a really concrete intention around some specific challenge that they want to work on. It's not impossible, but I don't think it's helpful to put the burden on the client to expect a lot of themselves or a lot to happen in the first session. A good intention for the first session is what we also often refer to as getting to know the space or getting to know the medicine. So that's just sort of paying attention to what naturally happens, learning how to relax into it, noticing, and being curious. I may say, things may come up, or you may see things or become aware of things. Let's just be curious and see. We don't have to accomplish anything in particular in the first one. So in summary, I've talked a little about what you need to mention to the client in the sense of debunking misconceptions they may have, some things to explain about expectations, what may happen or may not happen, and then helping them go into the first session with a sort of open curiosity intention so that they can just see what it feels like and so on for that first session. So that's the extent of what I wanted to put out for today with regard to framing expectations around the psychedelic experience. And we'll go into a little more detail about some more aspects of preparation in the next video. Thank you.